Hey folks, just a quick warning up front here. Obviously I'm going to be reviewing Age of Calamity today. There will be some spoilers visually up to around the end of Chapter 2, beginning of Chapter 3, but I will not be discussing any details of the story except for a couple of very, very minor ones, and I'll flag post when that's going to be happening. If you don't want to watch because of those, no harm, no foul. I will see you next week. If you are sticking with me, thank you so much. Let's jump in. So, howdy once again folks, your Princess Ayana here, and we are taking a look at a game that is on Switch but is very much not as windy. It's actually a sequel to one of my favourites of the last two Nintendo generations, which is a lot to live up to. Let us take a look at Hyrule Warriors Age of Calamity. Now, the first thing you might notice is that I did not refer to this as Hyrule Warriors 2, nor as far as I've been able to find out have Nintendo, Koei Tecmo or Omega Force who developed it. I would argue the reason for that is probably the biggest thing you need to know in deciding if you want to play this game. But before we get there, I do have to get something off my chest. I thought Breath of the Wild was okay. Pretty good game, a much needed evolution of a formula that was very much getting stale, but it had a lot of problems. The janky weather system, the weapon degradation system, and overall I did not care personally for the art direction. Now I mention this not solely to annoy the Zelda fans, although stick with me on that one, but because Age of Calamity obviously uses the same art style, characters, settings, and etc, which makes sense because it's a prequel. It's actually not a prequel, but we'll get onto that in a couple of minutes. As such, I will say I preferred the more colourful look of the original Hyrule Warriors, but I understand why the game looks how it does, I accept that it looks pretty, and it is down to my personal preference. This princess just likes a bit more colour in her video games. I'll be the first to admit that for a handheld hybrid console like the Switch, the visuals are very impressive. This comes at a price though. So let's talk about those performance issues, shall we? This'll be fun. Not gonna lie folks, I thought the demo of this played like absolute trash. To the point I was getting dogpiled by that really weird cult of Zelda fans that exists just for saying so on Twitter. But it really did. Parts of that first level were down to around 10 frames a second, and I personally don't consider that playable. Certainly not acceptable for AAA. That said, for the full game, I'm happy to announce that the problem was fixed. Sorta. You ever broken a bone, right? And you know when you're lying there having initially fallen, or maybe it was a car accident or something, and you're there with the bone broken and everything is complete agony and you don't think anything's ever going to be okay? That was the demo. The full game is more, you've been in hospital, you're wearing a cast now, you got some painkillers, and it's going to be a long road to recovery, and every untoward movement still feels like agony, but overall there's a feeling you are going to get better. That's the full game. Strangest thing when it comes to the performance issues, the worst culprit is the very first level, at least for the first 90% or so of the game. It is again improved from the demo, but the idea of a constant frame rate is still very much an alien concept here. There are some very late levels that have similar issues as well, but there's a lot going on screen by that point, so it's marginally more forgivable. Oh, and the issue with the frame rate absolutely tanking whenever you go anywhere near a chest that's got those sparkly things around it, yeah, that's still here. Still, everything is far improved, and it's far more playable than the demo. Honestly, were I not reviewing the game, the demo damn near had me cancelling my pre-order, and I would have regretted doing so. So the game's playable. Huzzah! First hurdle cleared. Would you want to though? Well, let's get a couple of things I feel are really important out of the way up front. If you are looking for Breath of the Wild 1.5 or a prequel that really fleshes out character stories and backgrounds, I'm going to keep it spoiler free here, but you're not going to get any of that. You will be disappointed. Everyone involved just sort of shows up, and the one or two brushstrokes of characterization they got in Breath of the Wild is pretty much all they have here as well. You might have heard that the game is considered canon to the Breath of the Wild story, which might technically be true, but if it is, it's a canon alternate timeline. So don't expect this to have much, if any, impact on Breath of the Wild 2 when it comes out. I personally felt it was a bit of a cop-out to call this canon at all, but they did do so in a couple of interviews. So as was the case with Breath of the Wild, Zelda is actually the most developed character here, but I just want to give this version of Zelda a hug. Her father is such an asshat to her. Leave Zelda alone! Now, all of that said, the lack of too detailed a story does service the gameplay pretty well, which is the important part here. It allows you to pick pretty much any character for most of the missions, and each of them plays in a very different and unique way. We are pulling from the Breath of the Wild character pool here, rather than every Zelda game ever like the last Hyrule Warriors game, so there is a little bit of a loss of variety, but it's made up for in how unique each of the characters feels. I had three favourites I did most of the missions with, Urbosa, Mipha, and one I can't mention here for spoilery reasons. But check them all out, they're so different. Ironically, the two characters I never really got to grips with playing much here were actually Link and Zelda. Link is okay, but he's this generic knight archetype. He doesn't really have anything interesting going for him beyond some swordplay moves. Zelda has the Sheikah Slate, but the problem is, so does every single other character. They just don't get it as their basic attack. As well as that, I never really got into the rhythm of how her combos were supposed to work. It's a personal thing, it's just ironic to me that Link and Zelda were the two I never really got to grips with. Real talk, princess to princess Zelda, I want to like you, I want to give you a hug like I said, but it's a Bosa all the way when it comes to combat for me. Sorry. Speaking of the Sheikah Slate, it is a new element added to combat this time around, and it does its job perfectly. It breaks up the monotony of fighting higher health bosses, largely by adding a game of Simon to it. You'll see a symbol appear on the boss, and if you use the right one on the Sheikah Slate, it will stagger the boss and let you take down their weak point gauge. It's a great method of keeping you on your toes, even if the ice one sometimes seems a little bit janky and doesn't quite work how I think it's intended to. Either that or I was using it wrong. One thing about it, it does have a recharge on it, which means the only time you're going to be using it fighting the bosses is for their counters. You can't really be creative with it, but you can for the basic enemies. But it pairs super well along with unique stuff like Urbosa's power to control lightning and Impa's shadow clones. It's a nice addition to the Dynasty Warriors style of combat. Speaking of Dynasty Warriors, you may notice I haven't mentioned it much. The game is still a Dynasty Warriors style game, but some of the fat's been trimmed here. To start with, capturing enemy keeps. It's still a thing you do, but honestly, they are either your actual objective or directly in the way of your objective. The idea of a bunch of keeps littered around the map that it's in your interest to go off and capture separately, that's kind of disappeared. That said, what it took right along with it was the need to run across the battlefield and babysit AI characters. Future Ayana, gimme a Ric Flair. Woo! Seriously, I only played this on normal, but not once did I have to traipse all the way across to the other side of the map because the AI had the fighting skills of a Deku nut. I didn't even notice it was missing till like the third mission, and it was an absolute delight. Important to note though, it was an absolute delight to me. If you come into this expecting Zelda skin Dynasty Warriors, which is what we got in the first Hyrule Warriors, you might be disappointed by this. We have definitely dropped into full hybrid territory here, rather than just a Dynasty Warriors reskin. Something we kept from the Dynasty Warriors series though, there's a lot of content here, there's a lot of bang for your buck. There's a load of crafting stuff to do, a load of cooking stuff to do, a load of extra missions. I finished the story mission and my completion percentage was so low, all I could think was Sad Gerard. Future Ayana, can we have a Sad Gerard? Yeah, this poor guy, whenever I complete a story on this lower total completion percentage, he always springs to mind. Incidentally folks, watch The Completionist on YouTube. It is one of my favourite series. I'll put a link in the description. I will say, I'm not terribly fussed by the default Map of Hyrule interface. It looks impressive, but for me personally, dropping into menus, they're still there, the game doesn't necessarily mention it, but they are. It's a far better way of getting the basic character upgrades and crafting done. I know this might make me sound like a spoil sport, but yeah, I just find menus better for this sort of thing. But both options are there, so it doesn't really make a difference. So yeah, this has been a tricky review for a number of reasons. First, there's so much I'd love to show you, but I don't really want to ruin this for anyone that hasn't played the demo and was on the fence. It really goes places with its playable character roster and some of its missions. Don't be put off by the performance, it really has been improved. Okay, so I actually do want to show you guys this one thing. It's a very minor spoiler, but I just found it really funny. Okay, you meet the fairies from Breath of the Wild. I don't think you meet the fairies in a Zelda game is too particularly big a spoiler, is it? So there she is, she looks fantastic. I was expecting to walk up to her and get a power-up, and I walked up and she proceeded to start slapping the shit out of me. It was just a really funny moment that I wanted to share with you guys. I hope you don't mind the spoiler for it. Well worth it, right? So the other reason this review is kind of tricky is, do I recommend the game? Well, I do, but then I fall into the issue of who I'm recommending this to. I already said folks looking for Breath of the Wild 1.5 aren't going to get on with this. Some Dynasty Warriors fans are going to be upset by the changes, but I think honestly that middle ground is the appeal of Age of Calamity. It is something different for both fans. It's definitely an evolution of the ideas from Hyrule Warriors. I feel it's being a little bit missold as a prequel, which might be a problem, but ultimately it's an experiment trying to hybrid two genres, and that goes a long way with me. I would strongly recommend playing this if that's the kind of thing you're interested in seeing. Maybe wait for a performance patch if you can though. Now, thank you for making it this far folks, it's been a slightly longer video than usual I know. Next week we are going to take a look at a game I am simultaneously extremely hyped and kind of terrified of reviewing. We are going to take a look at World of Warcraft Shadowlands. I will see you all then folks. Until then, I have been Princess Ayana. You are all beautiful. Peace. I'm out.